Drum roll.
Here's Denny and Don Shin today from Ixia.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We actually have three participants today representing three different time zones. On the very East Coast, we have our old friend Tim O'Neill. Hi, Tim. Good morning. Good
Hello,
afternoon.
everybody. Good morning.
And then in somewhere in Texas, somewhere dry, right?
That's right. It's dry this week. Yeah, in Austin, Texas.
We have Don Shin from Ixia, and so Don actually Ixia is a sponsor of Sharkfest, which will be happening in the Bay Area in less than a month. But as it turns out, Ixia is both a sponsor of Sharkfest and Love My Tour. So we have started this series of LMTV called LMTV Sharkfest, which, as you know, was kicked off last week with a interview with Gerald Combs. And so we are starting to put together some technical presentations by the sponsors. So today we have invited Don Shin. Now, Don, you actually you joined Ixia just a few years back, right, as part of acquisition, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. I came on board with the Breaking Point acquisition.
And now I'm not a technologist, and I don't even like to play one on TV. So my understanding is Breaking Point is a traffic generator?
Yeah, that's right. It's an application and security testing platform. It generates real-world application traffic as well as security attacks. And you use this in order to test and validate elements of networks as well as networks themselves.
Yeah, so in a way, that product has a lot of relevance to the Wireshark community, right? Because it's on one hand you're generating traffic, and then on the other you're actually receiving the traffic and doing the analysis. But my understanding is that your responsibility now in Ixia goes beyond that product. You actually Ixia has actually acquired quite a few companies, some of which are really good friends of Tim and myself. And if I understand it correctly, one of that is Anue, and then another one is NetOptics, correct?
That's right. That's right. And
so your actually has a much broader horizon now than just the traffic generator piece, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a lot of learning to do as I've changed roles very, very recently.
It's okay. It's okay. I was a professor for 9 years. You just have to be one lecture ahead of your students.
I like that. I like that.
That's all. And if you get really good at it, you don't even need the answer. You just have to identify the smart students in the class. They'll provide the answer for you.
Yeah, Denny believes in that theory that you don't have to be able to outrun a bear, just outrun the last guy.
Always surround yourself. Hey, Tim. And you should know this. I always surround myself with friends who run slower than me. But let's just jump onto the topic because Don very graciously accepted our invitation, and even accepted our challenge, which is that this presentation is somewhat vendor neutral and very technology focused. So if I understand it right, you're going to be talking about a problem that is very close to the hearts of our Sharkfest community, and then towards the end maybe use some examples from your product. But it's not really about your product. It's really about a very generic problem that our viewers face. Is that true, Don?
That's right. That's right. We want to present some strategies. I mean, this is a challenging time for IT organizations. One, from a security perspective wise, and then secondly, is as virtualization is really taking hold, and there's a lot of investments happening. And we want to present some ideas around, some strategies that IT managers can take in order to make better quantifiable decisions on security investments, monitoring investments, really taking a more proactive position for that. And that's really what the presentation that I'd like to talk to is give some ideas and some hints on how to do this.
Yeah, I had a quick glimpse of the presentation. There's a lot of material in it. It's very rich. So normally we try to keep the show to about 30 minutes, but I think in your case, just take your time, okay? Take your
Okay.
time.
Well, I
And
appreciate that.
yeah. So I believe the people who are interested in the material, they really want to get a very thorough treatment. So go ahead.
Okay. Well, I'll try to be respectful of the time and stay within those limits.
Okay. All right.
All right. So let's share that. Let me know if you're sharing. I believe I'm sharing now.
Uh, there you
There
go.
you go.
Okay.
All right. So as we talked about, we want to present some ideas around these investment cycles, especially around security and monitoring tools. And I say this in sort of an uncertain world because today, there's a reality that the real world can be harsh, right? We don't have to go dwell into some of the problems that companies have had around security issues, but reading any kind of trade journal or a blog, it's pretty easy to identify that there's just a lot of it happening. And after the fact, whether we were an active part or an active target of the incident or not, we, even from the armchair wise, we think about, well, what happened, right? And how can these kinds of things be avoided? And then under the breath, I think many times people think, gee, I sure wish I tested for that. And this is part of those ideas of how do you do that? So, without question, technology is a portion of the solution around the security and the dynamicness of our changing networks. And so I'm sure that all of our participants are at some stage of making some major changes on their networks, whether it's in the direction of virtualization or adding additional security products or monitoring or forensics types of products. And one thing you think about, and I was reading through a report, because this is from 2013, but I think this is still very applicable in 2015, is that there's this slowness, or there's of adopting new advanced technologies, right? And as I look at this survey and the results that came from the survey, you can sort of quantify this all around a lack of information. There's just an uncertainness about how effective will it be? Is this the right cost model for it? How will it integrate into my infrastructure? Is the performance the adequate performance? Right? And so one thing that I want to point out is that it's sort of inherent in the way that people or vendors sell their products, as well as how IT adopt these kinds of technologies that can be solved through using testing as a method to be able to realize the answers to these questions that haunt IT managers, and as a result of that, decision making and improving their defenses moves too slowly in comparison to the threat landscape that exists today. And so, if we step back and we think about, well, how do we make purchasing decisions, right? So if you're like most, you read data sheets and vendor data sheets and try to understand how the products are going to be, how it's going to work in your environment. Read third-party reports. I'm a marketing guy, so I love these quadrant kinds of things. They sort of oversimplify everything. But the reality is that these reports are anecdotal and based on surveys as well. And then we talk to people that we trust, some resellers and our counterparts in the industry. And then when we get close to a decision, we'll bring a product in, sort of navigate through the UI, maybe plug it into, put a little bit of traffic across it, and then go through that arduous task of making the decision. And usually these decisions take 6 months, a year, or 2 years in order to be able to make a real decision. So if we consider that first element, and I guess the point of that is that really the best strategy to take? But that's the reality of how things are done for the most part. So if we take a single vector like the data sheet, we need to understand, what is it telling us, okay? And so if we pick a parameter like performance, which is probably the easiest one to be able to understand, we think about what does it mean when we look at a data sheet or these reports that talk about performance? Well, the traditional way of doing this is to use these two standards. One is called RFC 2544, which was developed in 1999. And what it does is it uses UDP packets to push through these content-aware devices like next-generation firewall or application delivery controllers. And the issue is that this was a standard that was written for switching, right? And we're trying to use this as a method for quantifying performance through these advanced deep packet inspection kinds of products. And this is also relevant to our forensics tool, like capture tools and things like that, because they also behave differently depending on what kind of workloads that they're seeing. So a more recent standard, which is the RFC 3511, came out in 2003. It uses HTTP as a delivery mechanism where you define large object sizes, like 32K objects, with nothing in the payload, and you push this through these kinds of devices, and you come up with a number. Well, the problem is that in our modern networks, HTTP is really just a carrier for other kinds of applications, right? And what drives businesses today is applications, and these lower level kinds of standards of trying to articulate performance just doesn't have very much use to it. Because if we think about our networks, they're very complex systems. They have many different kinds of applications running across them. We deploy these content-aware devices in order to help us to get visibility and secure our networks. But at the same time, what we also have to realize is that all networks are unique. They're like a fingerprint. There are no two networks that are the same. They're all using different types of workloads, different behavior, and a plethora of different kinds of applications that are on there. So let's think about this in the context of a use case so that we can get a little bit closer grasp of what is all of this all about, right? So I want to give you a case study of a large bank that was upgrading their perimeter defenses from firewalls to next-generation firewalls. And I think for this audience, whether you're directly participating in this or not, this is a common occurrence that's happening today, right? In 2015, nearly 70% of perimeter defenses that are going to be deployed are next-generation firewalls. And so a couple of things that they've been thinking about, one was that they needed to narrow down to a single vendor in order to make it more manageable. But they also recognized the fact that they had 4 very distinct use cases inside of their environment, whether it was in the branch office, in the data center, in the office environment, trading floor, and so forth. So they started to do the traditional way of making a decision. They read through data sheets, read through quadrant reports, talked to people, and they narrowed down to 3 particular vendors, and all 3 vendors advertised 10 gig next generation firewall. So what we did, the first thing that we did was we helped them run a proof of concept, which was a head-to-head bake-off of these 3 vendors. Okay? All vendors were able to come in and tune the system. The bias was around performance, so their tuning was to try to maximize their performance. So the first thing we did was we ran a synthetic baseline, which would have been the RFC 3511, as I mentioned before. And what you see in that first column is that when you're running synthetic workloads across these content-aware devices, the caching architecture and the smarts that are inside the devices say, hey, this is nothing. I'll just cache it and pass it through, right? And so you saw the performance level was basically the same, right? Then when we start to apply real-world traffic that models their true end environment, we start to see some really much more interesting information about what the biases and the problems that that particular product was trying to solve. And so here you can see that there's a sort of a non-linear behavior depending on what kind of workloads that are being applied to these next generation firewall kinds of products. Okay? And so this is why traffic really matters. And at the end of the day, when we were talking about those things that IT managers get stuck about making decisions, the only answer they're trying to get to is how will this technology perform in my environment? And this becomes a strategy for how you do these kinds of things. Okay? And by the way, this took 3 days in order to get to this quantifiable data. So it's not out of band from that perspective. So all of that I wanted to point out was, okay, so what, right? It's interesting information. You can clearly see one is a better solution than the other. And why this all matters is because it's all about money, right? If in this chart, it's a little busy chart, but let me just briefly describe it to you. What I did was I took an NSS report, NSS Labs report, who's a lab here in Austin, and looked at their quadrant report and arbitrarily picked 4 of the firewalls, or next generation firewalls that were listed inside of it. I picked them based on the fact that CDW had advertised prices up on their website. And so if you were to talk to these vendors and describe the problem that you were having, they would probably say, yeah, my solution will be right for you, right? And so we look at the variability of these kinds of products, and we see, you know, there's a huge variability. And then if we take the statistical forecast from Infonetics that the average data center is going to spend 17 million in security products, and that 60% of those are going to be firewall based, we can see that there is a humongous difference between the solutions that you're going to deploy, and making the right decision based on the budgets that you're working off of can have a really big impact, right? Now, the other portion of it that we need to think about is, once we've decided on a vendor and that the technology is the right one for that particular that enterprise, then the next question that comes into play is what are the SKUs, and how do I right-size my investment for the locality where I'm going to be deploying these kinds of products? Okay. Now, this is true for hardware-based products, and this is true for virtual products. Of how much capacity do I need to deploy? Because obviously, performance is not, cost to performance is not linear, right? And so how do you make that decision if you don't know how that technology will behave? Then I would say that you typically, people work off of derating, right? Which is, I know this vendor, I've dealt with them before, I have a high confidence level, so I'm going to derate whatever they say to me. If they say 10 gig, I'll derate it by 60%. This vendor, I have lower confidence, so I'm going to derate it by 70, 80%, whatever that would be, right? But the point of that is that you can't know, and if you don't know, you're guessing, right? So all of this stuff is surrounding around being able to test. And in the traditional way of how enterprises have done testing is I think that this probably depicts your lab, where you've built up some kind of a rack with some VMs inside of it, with some open source tools, trying to create some sort of a workload in order to be able to do some testing, right? And the problem with these is they're very temperamental. People usually build these. These are one-off kinds of things, and they're not replicable. They become like golden things where nobody touches it because the guy who built it or that programmed it is no longer with the company. And today, there's many other solutions available, both from Ixia, our competitors, as well as the power and capabilities of virtualization has made it possible for organizations to be able to create much more complex and replicable kind of environments to be able to do some sort of testing. Okay, so one thing that I wanted to try to get the point across was to do a very short demo to let you understand how do you do this. And in this particular demo, I'm going to show how we're testing and understanding the performance and functionality of virtual products. And so in this particular demo, what you're going to see is a chain of events that's happening. We have on the left side our Breaking Point Virtual Edition that's sitting in a VMware environment, sitting on top of a server, co-located with a Cisco Fireside virtual firewall. Okay, and so we have IPS on active at that time. Then the data is being pushed up to our packet broker. This is an Ixia product called the NTO, or this is a tuplet-based packet brokering solution to feed tools. And on there is a module that is an application level, layer 7 aware classification engine to supplement the packet brokering, to do the packet brokering at application layer in addition at the 5-tuple layer. And then lastly, we're going to generate net flows off of that workload and send it over to this Plixer scrutinizer, which is a forensics tool for understanding what's happening on that network. Okay, so let me call up a couple of windows here. Excuse me. Okay. All right. So let me get these organized for you so it'll be a little easier to read. So what we have right now in this simulation, there is a test going on right now, and you can see that this is our breaking point user interface, and we're generating approximately 200 meg of application traffic, and that's being bounded by the VM here with the how we have it configured from the SourceFire product. If we take a look at the test that we're actually creating, that we're running across here, what you see is that we have these components that are instantiated where you can see here the number of IP addresses here. So we are using 25,600 unique IP addresses. We have an enterprise traffic mix that's happening inside of here, which would include like MySQL, Exchange email, SMB file transfers. Then we've added some social media workloads, and there's a DOS attack happening inside of this network. And on top of that, we've added security strikes inside of it. Okay? And so these security strikes are classified as security level 1, so these are critical ones that you can find in the CVE, and we've added a Heartbleed attack inside of it as well. Okay? And how you can see what's happening here is that if we look at the Cisco firewalls dashboard here, we see the connection events that are happening inside of it, what kinds of applications are on here, and then we look at the intrusion events that it's seeing that the simulation is creating. Okay? And then we can visualize what's happening by looking at our ATIP processor, and here you can see that the geolocality of where this traffic is happening. We have a data center being modeled in North America with users from China, Australia, Brazil, Canada, and you can see up here the kinds of applications that are running inside of this network, right? And as well as the types of OSs that are being simulated and the kinds of browsers that are being used in the HTTP and HTTPS. And then lastly, if we look at the dashboard from the forensics tool, it's also seeing that this workload that it sees is as real, and it's triggering on the types of things that it was looking for. Okay? And so by being able to simulate a real-world environment, now using our tools or any other tools, this gives you a much better sense of how to be able to quantify, the performance constraints, or how the behavior and how you're going to optimize the configurations for this VM, for this firewall, as well as the resources that you're going to need and the tuning that you can do in order to make sure that these configurations are right for what you're trying to do in your particular deployment. Okay? So let me give you another case study. So this was this is United Healthcare. So we had one of their IT people come to our booth at RSA, and he was talking specifically about the kinds of things that they were doing in order to basically maximize their investments. They too were going through a cycle of a lot of investments, and there was some insights that they provided here. Right? One was that they read analyst reports and industry third-party reports, and things that reported as poor marks, when they actually tested it inside of their environment, they found that many were performed very well, and it wasn't consistent with what the reports said. Now that doesn't mean that the report is incorrect. It just means that in the context of United Healthcare, that this data was more valuable to them. The other thing that they were talking about was vendor bias. It's very hard to move from one vendor to the next vendor. There's a lot of innovative technologies coming out, and getting that quantifiable data to present to the executive and to the management team on why you're making the decision is having data becomes a much more powerful tool, right? And so lots of benefits that they saw associated with that. Other things that you can do in addition to just doing component level types of things that you should really consider is that when you're making a major change inside of your organization, that high resolution testing at scale with security becomes a really critical point. And so here's another example of a large bank. They were deploying a new mobile banking application and a data center to support that. And what they you know, it was a very big investment, and there was a lot of risk associated with it. So they decided to take on a more methodical approach of testing for functionality, modeling that across the current usage as well as future usage across cycles from seasonal, weekly, daily, you know, Christmas cycles, things like that. And they were creating as close to real user behavior as possible. They wanted to understand what the high availability architecture, how fast it was able to recover. And then on top of that, they needed to understand the security elements of what happens to the system as you fuzz it with weird-looking traffic, what happens during a DOS attack in particular, right? And wanted to model a variety of those kinds of things as well. Right? The last one case study, and I say this because I just want people to understand that, you know, these things are achievable, right? And that you don't have to base your decisions on guesswork. And so this particular one was a large consumer electronics manufacturer, and the problem that they had was they had seen incidences of leakage of information about new product releases. And as we know, for consumer electronics companies, you know, that big bang at the beginning is a really important part of it. So they were going to architect and deploy a new forensics technology. And the particular area that they were really concerned about was in the social media side of it. That they were concerned that leakage was happening off of the internal employees and on Twitter and Facebook and things like that. Right? So they were going to deploy this new technology. They decided to replicate their enterprise environment and then send slews of social media content at an architecture that they had come up with, right? And what they found was that these forensics tools for detecting worked really, really well, right? But they worked really, really well at low bandwidth, but that they struggled high bandwidth once they started approaching their capacity. And of course, this is way before the sort of the data sheet limits of what the vendors have outlined. So they ran through these, and as a result of this, they had to change their architecture of how they were going to do the forensic analysis on these types of feeds. Okay? Right? So hopefully this gives you guys some ideas about why it's important to take a little bit more control of how you make your investments and how you architect your system, and most importantly, to walk away with the understanding that there are many tools and available out there in the market today for you to be able to do these kinds of things yourself. Okay, so let me stop the screen sharing.
Excellent.
Okay.
Tim?
I was going to say my big concern is a lot of people are doing a lot of testing for the virtual world. They're testing the cloud storage facilities. They're testing all this stuff. The only problem is what you tested yesterday is not what's going to happen today. But people have to start doing testing. They don't do it. You mentioned you put in something for Heartbleed. Well, you know, Heartbleed, we got Poodle. We got 5 or 6 more that followed right on the SSL TLS hacks, which are growing. It seems like every day something new's coming out, but people have to establish a baseline. I've always been an advocate for testing. I wrote several articles about Breaking Point when they were bought by Ixia, and it's like taps. You always have to argue with people. Is there a difference between a tap and a span port? Oh, it's okay with me. No, it's not okay, because you're in a security environment. You're protecting data and people's information, whether it's PII, PHI, or PCI. And we're going to start seeing a lot more fines. The latest FTC thing is that if you can't prove you only lost 10 records, they're going to assume you lost every record you have. Not just employees, but customers, friends, whatever you've got, and you're going to be fined for that. So it's a new era. It's not like it's something nice to do. It's not something that's cool. Now I have some predictability about the capability of my applications, my storage, my my virtual world that I want to live in, it's a necessity, and people have got to start testing. But the only one problem I do have, though, is everybody talks about the next generation firewall. That's sort of like someone saying, what standards of IPv6 do we have to attain to become IPv6 qualified? There's 480 some standards, and but people have got to start testing. I don't care how they do it, and I do have a problem with people saying it's a next generation firewall, because that was yesterday. And, you know,
yeah, I think we should call it today's generation firewall, right?
Right. Yeah, that's really it. It should be something like today's generation firewall.
Take the mystery out of it, right?
Well, yeah, but even then, you know, we're as well as I do that, and Breaking Point and Fortinet did a lot of testing early on, and I think that's one of the cool things about Fortinet is that they don't take anybody's. If someone comes and says, "This is my network," okay, and I want to make sure that your devices are going to help protect my network, they're a big user of Breaking Point, Ixia Breaking Point, and they test it to match the specifications that the customer brings to their lab. And that's an imperative, but you can't do that once. You got to have a program, because whatever your network was 4 days ago, it ain't today the same thing you had 4 days ago.
Yeah, and I think, Tim, your point about, you know, do vendors test? Absolutely, vendors test, and our core business is based around it, right?
Not all of them.
I think that the exciting portion of what's happened with technology is that things that were only reachable by the QA teams in large equipment manufacturers and the big service providers like AT&T and Verizon's of the world is that the technology has moved and become very accessible to enterprises to be able to take ownership themselves. It's not enough that the vendor tests to a spec. What each IT organization has to understand is it's their network, and unfortunately it's their responsibility. But fortunately, the technology has moved to the point where it's accessible, it's replicable, and it's easy enough that there shouldn't be excuses that I'm not going to test because it's too hard.
Well, and I agree with you that, but we're still seeing only a small percentage, less than 10% of companies testing deployments of physical events like firewalls, routers, switches, and I guess that's what frustrates me. Is we talk about it, it's an imperative, but it's still less than 10% of the industry that we know. And yeah, vendors do test. I mean, if you're smart, when you go to your vendor, you say, "This is my environment. This is what I got to do. Here's a sample of my data. You know, test it and make sure it looks good." But then when you deploy it, that's a whole different world.
Yeah, you have to think about how often do you patch it.
Right.
And things change pretty radically every time. That network is dynamic and moving. Right?
And so are the attacks.
I want to bring this back to the Wireshark community, and this is the first year that Ixia is sponsoring Sharkfest, isn't it?
I believe so. So.
Well, no, Anue used to do it. While Anue was there, they used to go there quite a bit.
Yeah, the packet brokering is a powerful element of getting visibility.
I guess what I'm getting at is that you're bringing. I mean, I understand Anue, but as Ixia, you're actually bringing a much broader message to the technical community, right?
That's right.
And I bet I'm not alone when I think of Ixia. I mean, I know a lot of it has happened in the last few years. Ixia has kind of moved beyond the test and measurement, and you know, really positioning itself as more or less a full service networking monitoring tool company. But still, you know, I bet I'm not alone in that. When I think of Ixia, I'm still thinking of that little tiny company that was competing oxygen with Spirent. But that's a very different company now. Ixia is a very different company now. And so you're going to be in San Jose.
Yes.
And so for our audience, what is that one simple message that you want to bring to the San Jose? What is that? You know, so a lot of times it's not just the message you want to send, but you know, you want to overcome some of the pre-existing knowledge of.
Yeah, yeah. And the message that we convey is that we are a building block element of being able to be security resilient. Okay? And our tools, both from a testing and from a visibility perspective wise, are that infrastructure element for enterprises to be confident that they are security resilient.
Good.
Can I coin a phrase? We've talked around all these different things for a long time. And of course, we have the router plane and we have the, the physical planes and all this stuff. I tell people that if you don't create your own visibility plane, it don't matter what you've done with the rest of your network, you're not going to be able to see what's going on. You certainly will never have the truth.
Yes.
And I prefer to rely on a tap and a good packet broker than I would on a router, with EPC or a span port. And I call it the visibility plane. And this is a testing plane. This is where we have to start testing. We need to identify these and take hold.
Yes.
Does that make sense, Don? I mean, we're all marketing people here, and marketing people in some way behave like engineers.
Denny.
We like to.
Oh, Denny, I'm not.
Well, you are, Tim. You are. You just that you still carry the technology. I guess we are here to look.
I know what you're saying.
You know what I'm talking about. That we're not advertising people, okay?
Yeah, that's true.
We're marketing people in the sense that we are here to champion a technology.
Well, we want at the end of the day is how do we help by knowledge and technologies for enterprises to build secure, resilient, high-performance networks. That's really it. Right?
That's it. And well, I guess what I was thinking was really, as a technologist, as a technology marketing person, we sometimes behave just like engineers. We like to create our own phrase. We like to create our own terminology, right? But it is true. I mean, even though I forgot who created the word visibility, but I think visibility, the concept of visibility is getting some traction. And so one of the things that Tim and I have created, here we're talking about LMTV Sharkfest, which is really an event-based theme, focusing on the Sharkfest that's coming up in 20-some odd days. But one of the things that I like to do is to invite you back after Sharkfest, and maybe invite you back into this thing that we call the LMTV visibility.
Okay.
Which again is a technology show. It's less about a solution and more about defining problem.
Yeah.
More about I mean, and you know that this is our job often is less about giving a customer the exact solution that we think is right for them, but rather really try to elevate the conversation so that at least we agree on what the problem is, right? Isn't that true? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we have many things to talk about in that area as well.
Yeah. So with that, I think that I think it's important to our community, to the people who are watching this. Hopefully, people who are either planning on coming to Sharkfest, or maybe later on they have already been to Sharkfest and met up with Don and wanted to kind of review and watch this. I think it's important to reach out to them to say, hey, Ixia is a sponsor of both Love My Tool and Sharkfest. We're here to help them to convey that message to you, which is that they are a full service, or at least they aspire to be a full service monitoring company. They have some really incredible product that they have really created their own, or they had acquired over the years, is now consolidated into their portfolio. And I think borrowing Don's work is that they have all the building blocks for you to build a robust, secure network.
I like it.
Like it? Okay.
I like it.
And then I think we'll come back, and one of the things that Tim and I always talk about is our work is never done. You know, just when you think that you have the perfect message, doesn't mean that you can get it through the first time. You kind of have to just hit it with the 2x4 over and over and over again, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think with that, I want to thanks again for coming, and I want to extend the invitation for future shows, you know, where we could continue to have this conversation, and I want to thank Tim again for being here.
And there's a number of articles on Love My Tool about Anue, packet brokers, Breaking Point, Fortinet. A lot of stories I wrote over the years about you guys. I've known Arrow for a long time, and back when he was just a poor salesman. And
well, now he's a rich CTO. So
yeah, we Tim and I we really enjoy our association with the founders of Anue. We like the product, and I have even a history with you know, not with Anue, but with that whole space, right, with my last company. So yeah, we like it. We like it. We want to help. And
great.
So with that, John, any last comment that you want to make before we sign off?
No, I really appreciate the time. I look forward to meeting people at Sharkfest.
And so just when you're out here in the West Coast, don't forget to come up to San Francisco.
Will do. Will do.
All right. And if you need a recommendation on good Chinese restaurants, I can help.
I'll be reaching out then.
If you've never been to Sharkfest, you'll have a blast. It's a wonderful group of people. It's a community, and this is the first year, by the way.
Yeah, right. So not only that is Ixia's first year, it's your first year, right, Don?
This is my first year. Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna
enjoy it.
This is the beginning of an addiction, okay?
Okay.
And this is the first year they've allowed vendors in like a conference mode where they can meet and greet and talk to people. In the past, it was kind of like tables against the wall, throw your literature there and leave. But they're growing and growing, and of course, Wildpackers has been downloaded hundreds of millions of times. So
Wireshark.
What would I say?
Wirepackets.
Oh, Wirepackets. I mean,
yeah,
Wireshark.
Okay.
I'm getting old. I don't remember where I am.
I don't. Listen, that's okay, Tim. I don't get that much opportunity to correct you. You know that. So I'm gonna. But anyway, so with that, see you next week.
Yep.
Great.
Bye. Be blessed.
Bye bye.
Goodbye.